In this section, we're going to focus on finding the principal root. That means we're using our restricted domains of cosine and sine so that we have that one-to-one function. And we're going to do number 23 and 25. So let's start with number 23. We have 7/8 cosine x equals 7/16. So your first step is to isolate that cosine x. So to do that, I'm going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the 7/8. So I'll multiply this by 8/7 and this by 8/7. And on the left, this cancels, and I get just cosine x on the left. And on the right, I have the 7's cancel, and the 8 and the 16 reduce to 1/2. So I get cosine x equals 1/2. And now I need to get the x by itself, which means I need to get rid of this thing. Rid of the cosine. So to get rid of cosine, I have to undo cosine with the cosine inverse. And whatever I do on the left, I also do on the right, which leaves on the left, cosine and cosine inverse will cancel, and I'm left with x. And on the right, I think, okay, so on my unit circle, now remember I have my restricted domain. So I'm really only looking at the top half of my unit circle. But that's okay, because I have a positive x value for cosine, so it's in the top half, so I can just use that unit circle. So in my unit circle, when is cosine equal to 1/2? When is the x value equal to 1/2? That is, let's see, 1/2 is smaller than radical 3/2, so it's kind of shorter in the x direction. And I know that those angles that are right next to the y-axis have a denominator of 3. So this angle is pi over 3. So in this one, x equals pi over 3. And we're only looking for the principal root, which means I just look for that one root that's within that restricted domain of my inverse. So that's my final answer for number 23. And number 25. So this time I want to get the sine theta by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by 4. And on the left, I have 1/2. And on the right, I have sine theta. So that means, if I want to get theta by itself, that means I want to take the inverse, sine inverse of both sides. So if I take sine inverse of sine theta, I get theta. And whatever I do on the left, I got to do on the right. So sine inverse of 1/2, I have to think, okay, so on my unit circle, now remember I'm on that restricted domain unit circle, so I'm not using the whole circle. For sine, I just use the right side of the circle. And I have pi over 6 and pi over 4 and pi over 3. And when I go down, for the bottom half of that circle, I am actually using the negative angles. So that's negative pi over 6, negative pi over 4, and negative pi over 3. Okay, but I'm looking for when that y value equals 1/2. So 1/2 is shorter than radical 3/2, so that means it's this one right there, which corresponds to theta being equal to pi over 6. Final answer.